Let's jump right in to what the first subject is, environmental liens. And this is something we've heard a lot about in the last few years. In the early 2000s, there was a new process that came up to search mostly commercial properties. Here's basically what happened. You had commercial properties that were being sold, and lenders were taking them back through foreclosure back in the 90s and 2000s, and we're finding that some of these properties had environmental problems, had oil spills or contamination, and the banks didn't want them back because the cost to remediate that was more than what their loan was. So now they didn't want them, the loan owner wasn't paying for them, so they were just sitting out there. So to come up with a mechanism to get these properties moving again, the government basically came up with a process called, it's a landowner defense called CERCLA. And there's a attachment in the back of your handout that gets into all that. It basically says, look, if you buy a property or you lend on a property and you do some basic due diligence beforehand, if that property has any prior contaminations, leaks, if you buy it and it turns out there's something, you're off the hook. And it's pretty reasonable what they ask you to do. The process that they require that you take is under two standards, ASTM standards. It's E1527 and 2247. They really don't mean anything. You can look them up. I can't publish text of them because they're actually copyrighted. ASTM copyrights all their standards, but you can read what they are. It requires you to do certain due diligence. That's something done by an environmental engineering company called the Environmental Site Assessment. And you'll see that term thrown around. It's called an ESA. There's a Phase 1 ESA and a Phase 2 ESA. Phase 2 basically is Phase 1, and then we do more stuff. The due diligence that the environmental engineering company has to do includes a lot of stuff: soil testing, seeing if there was leaks, and some property records research. What they call in their industry checking for environmental liens. The problem is liens to them means something different than it does to us in the title industry. A lien to them is basically, the wording in the standard says something like anything that is in the land records that roughly affects the property in an environmental issue. What does that mean? It could mean lots of different things. It could mean a lien on a property, but how many times do you see a lien that says something environmental? Somebody didn't pay to clean up the oil and they filed a lien on the property. It's pretty rare. But there's other things which the environmental engineering company might want to know about. I'm going to give you an example of one which is we use commonly. Let's say somebody has a strip mall, and in that strip mall there's a dry cleaner. Most dry cleaners in almost every state are required to document where their chemicals go. They buy 50 pounds of dry cleaning chemical. They have to show where they dispose of that 50 pounds through a licensed disposal company, and they have receipts that show matching weights. If they don't have the receipts, they get written an infraction from their licensing board, and that goes into some record somewhere. Is that an environmental lien? By the way, we think about liens. It's not a lien. However, the environmental engineering company may want to know about that. How is that something that you would find out about? Well, that's something you want to know in your standards. Does that environmental engineering company just want you to look only in the land records, or do they want you to look in the state DEP environmental protection records, the federal EPA records? Do they want you to look at prior owners? That's why it's important to get the scope of the search from that client so you know where to search and where not to search. Ideally, what you want to be looking at as a title abstractor are records only in the land records and only for what period of time, because then you know what the scope of your search is. There's a lot of other stuff that the environmental engineering company puts into their report, that Phase 1 ESA. It's usually a 50 or 60 page report. The typical cost right now for the client is upwards of $2,000, and they do a lot of things. If they just say, we want an environmental lien report, you may not know what they're thinking you're going to do and what they're thinking they're going to do. So it's important to figure that out. The other thing that's debatable even within that industry is whether or not a chain of title is required. There is some language in the standard that says you have to go back to the mid-1950s, not 50 years, mid-1950s or even 40s, for prior owners. But it doesn't say chain of title or title records, it says prior owners. So that's something you want to find out. Does the environmental engineering company want you to do a chain of title? The reason why is if you have any kind of even reasonably complex commercial property, if you're just looking at, you're looking for liens, even 50 years back on liens, that's one project. What kind of project is it to go back to the 1950s for a chain of title on a commercial property? That's a whole different ballgame. The pricing on that is going to be like night and day. So you need to know, are they going to want the chain of title or not? If they don't, guess what? That might be an opportunity to sell them one. Because you might want to ask them, well, gee, don't you need a 50-year chain of title? In the industry, the environmental engineering industry, it's still debatable. They still don't even agree among themselves if they need to do it. So if you ask them, they might say, yeah, well, how much is that going to be? And then that might be an additional source of a search. That's going to be a pretty expensive search. You got to remember, they have to fit all their stuff into like a $2,000 report that they're passing along to their client, or roughly. If it's a more expensive property, maybe more. So you have to keep that in mind, what their budget's going to be. A good source for information on this, there's a company in Connecticut called EDR. In the back of your book, there's a copy of their webpage. They have a forum called Common Ground, which is a forum where environmental engineers and vendors, and even yourself, can sign up and exchange information, exchange messages about environmental lien searches and about the industry. You can get a lot of information about that from EDR. It's also a good source of potential business. You can call up a guy there named Hank Burnham. He's their purchasing manager for EDR. They buy environmental lien searches all over the country. He's very interested in cultivating a group of abstractors. He knows all about NALTIA. He knows about how NALTIA members are more interested in their craft and their trade and industry than a typical abstractor. So keep that in mind. Go ahead, Jay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Let's say you've got a strip mall that's sold as dirt.
Yep.
You want to search, back these various agencies.
Yep.
Well, company businesses move in, move out, move in, move out. How would you know, or where did you find out the information where, okay, they had a dry cleaner down at this end, and then over here was a different dry cleaner. They moved out like
20 years ago. That's an excellent question. That's part of how much, that's probably beyond the scope of what a title abstractor is going to do. The older tenants. However, it probably is important if see if there's leasehold recordings for the current leases, or maybe even going back a certain period of time. Here's another issue. The environmental engineer has to put down any red flags of what might be environmental issues for that property. If the owner of the property is XYZ Corporation, that doesn't necessarily mean any red flags for the property. However, if the tenant was ABC Chemical Company, that might be something that that environmental engineer might want to know about. So if you can find any leasehold interests that are recorded, that's something you can pass along. Look, you may not be able to find everything, but what you can find, you can put on there, is always beneficial to the client. And if you can put more stuff than what they're thinking, that will also increase the odds of getting another order. They have to do a lot of the legwork themselves. One of the things they have to do is physically go to the property, not only do soil testing, but interview all the adjacent property owners and tenants. Did you ever see any spills next door? Did you ever see any spills next door? Who used to be there? They have to do interviews. How much they do with that, that's up to them. They have a roughly defined phrase on that standard called AAI, which is called, you have to do all appropriate inquiries. What does that mean? Well, whatever they think is appropriate. So another thing you can do as an abstractor is if you can identify the adjacent property owners, that's not real hard to do. You can look at the plot map, see the parcel numbers, and just put down the owners. That may help them. You may want to charge for it. You may want to be a public relations kind of freebie for them, but that's something you can do. But that's a good question. That the tenants are important to know about. Most of that's on them to figure out, but the more you can help them with it within your budget and their budget, that's good stuff to know. Good question. The one other issue to keep in mind is even on residential property, some counties and states have what they call super liens, which are superior to anything. And even on residential properties, there may be, if you have a vacant lot and stuff gets dumped on the lot and nobody cleans it up, if the town, there's a town in Rhode Island, I think it's Providence, goes in and cleans it up and the owner doesn't pay, they can file a lien for the cleanup superior to anything else is on the property. First mortgage, taxes, anything. And the town can foreclose based on that. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. You may not see as much on the actual environmental lien orders, but it is something else that's out there. There's a lot of stuff on this environmental liens issue. Again, we're going to go quick through these because we have a lot of subjects to cover, but I want to kind of give you all like a little taste and what your feet are about what these subjects are like and what the searching is. The bottom line is it's really just another search. It's really just another search of records. The scope of that search is going to be defined by the client, what you're looking for. Are you looking for just liens that have the word environmental on them? So that's what some clients want. They just want to know, does the word environmental show up on a lien on this property? End of story. They don't want to know if the dry cleaner didn't turn his records. They don't want to know if the owner's name was chemical. They just want to know this. Some want to know more. And you can kind of gauge what you're going to do for that client based on what they want and what their budget is. So the thing to keep in mind is you're the expert. Even though they're the environmental company, they're asking about environmental lien searching, you might think, well, yeah, I don't know anything about this. I just heard Dave talk about it for 10 minutes. That's all I know. You're the expert. They're looking to you to be the expert because you know about the land records. They don't. And they may not even know that much about environmental lien searching. Heck, this subject was just invented in 2005. So it's not really that developed in their terms either.